When you listen to the voices, you begin to understand the man.
He's a giant, and maybe if he's in another country, he would be a king.
I think he gave what he had to help bring about a better day for his people.
His optimism came through even though he was temporarily discouraged. He said, we'll win it. It's just a matter of time. Very strong man.
I think about a gentle, tender man who was always rushing to get home to my mother.
My husband believed in the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. He thought that all people were brothers, and he treated them like they were.
Good evening, I'm Edie House, and tonight we have a very special story to tell you. It's about a man who dedicated his life to making this nation a better place for all Americans. That man, Clarence Mitchell, Jr. And on Friday, this courthouse will be renamed the Clarence Mitchell, Jr. Courthouse. In order to understand the importance of what will happen here Friday, you must first understand how much things have changed. You must go back to the days when Clarence Mitchell, Jr. walked through these doors working as a reporter. He could not sit where his white counterparts sat. He could not join his white counterparts for lunch because restaurants wouldn't allow blacks to sit with whites. His work was making sure that change could and would happen. That work is well known in the halls of Congress, where he lobbied for civil rights. His patience and persistence earned him the title of the Lion in the Lobby, and we feel the benefits of what the lion roared in our everyday lives. It is time then to tell you more about this man, more about the changes he brought about, and more about the legacy he left behind. Mitchell Jr. traveled all over this country, constantly fighting for civil rights, but he always came home to Baltimore. It was where he had started his fight and where he would end it 73 years later.
Clarence Mitchell, Jr. was born March 8, 1911, in this house on Stockton Street, a street so small that people refer to it as an alley. He was the second of 7 children, the oldest boy. But he did most of his growing up here on Bloom Street, and it is those days that Brother Perrin remembers with fondness.
One of the things that I remember most was the trips to Druid Hill Park with my brother. He was quite an athlete. He was always going out to the park to run, and he always, as often as possible, took his baby brother, me, with him. He'd put me under the tree while he would run around the reservoir, and I had to guard the sandwiches and whatever cold drinks we had.
As a family, they spent their Sundays together at St. Catherine's Episcopal Church, where young Clarence served as an altar boy. The church would continue to be a big influence in his life. Another influence, education. He graduated from Douglas High School and went on to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. When he returned to Baltimore, he carried a degree and the desire to know more of the Negro condition in America. Much of what he wanted to know he learned firsthand as a reporter for the Baltimore Afro-American newspapers.
He just covered the last lynching in Maryland. He'd been down on the eastern shore, I think it was Snow Hill, and that thing had such an impact on him that he became physically ill. And frankly, I didn't know what racism was at that age, but I knew that something very ugly and terrible had hurt my brother, and that made me hurt almost as much as he did.
It was the ugly and terrible that Clarence Mitchell fought to change. He was an activist. He was a mentor.
He was a kind of man who had a great deal of prudence, integrity, of high principle. never any degree of cynicism. And that's what I respected about him. He was the kind of person you wanted to talk to, that you wanted advice from, because he did advise 8 presidents. And I thought I was very fortunate to sit with Clarence many times in his office and just talk.
Clarence Mitchell was one of the first to lobby for the appointment of Bishop Robinson as Baltimore's first black police commissioner.
I was aware that he had a great deal of confidence in me. It was a mutual admiration society, I suspect. I was aware that that was one of his dreams.
Clarence came to see me a couple times, and he said, you know, Bishop Robinson is highly qualified. And I said to Mr. Mitchell, I know that. I don't know what I'm going to do. And he said, well, I think Bishop Robinson would be a good man for the job. And I looked at him, he looked at me, and we smiled, and that was all.
He was a very remarkable man, and I'm so deeply touched by the courthouse being named for him, but so deeply disappointed that he wasn't there when I was sworn in.
Millions of Americans who never met Clarence Mitchell, and even more millions yet to be born, will live their lives as first-class citizens because of what he did. They are the words of Joseph Rowell, a longtime friend who worked in Washington with Mitchell. As Ted Venetoulis explains, it is in Washington that you understand the full scope of what Clarence Mitchell accomplished.
Clarence Mitchell knew this capital like the back of his hand. He knew its soul, he knew its secrets. He knew what made it work, what made it cranky. He knew all of its Byzantine behavior. And that's why, even though he never once held an elected office, they gave him the title they gave no other man in this town, the 101st Senator.
Clarence Mitchell Jr. earned that title. The man was a tireless advocate for the cause of civil rights.
Well, I think Clarence probably spent more time on Capitol Hill than the other 100 senators. He devoted just infinite hours to going over, explaining, cajoling, persuading members of the Senate. And he earned a unique title, and it should be his for all time.
In fact, Clarence Mitchell Jr. may have, more than any other American, been responsible for the legislative changes that, in turn, altered American life. In the early 1940s, he was a friend of Franklin Roosevelt. In the late 40s, he persuaded President Harry Truman to desegregate the armed services. In 1957, he worked with President Eisenhower and a reluctant Congress to pass the country's first Civil Rights Act in 82 years.
A great change is at hand, and our task, our obligation, is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all.
With President Kennedy, he pushed for the establishment of the Civil Rights Commission. And in those boisterous years of the 1960s, so charged with both belligerence and hope, Mitchell was part of that movement. He marched, he carried pickets, he went to jail. But he was not like the other activists of that era.
Well, I don't think you can really compare Martin Luther King and Clarence Mitchell, because they were different people. They performed a different function. Clarence was a lawyer. He wasn't a preacher. He understood the law. He understood what needed to be done within the judicial process and within the legislative process. And he pursued his craft with great skill and great patience and great determination.
This is going to be a national commitment. It may be a long time before we ever get this, the law of the land.
Clarence Mitchell Jr. was Lyndon Johnson's secret weapon, forging the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And it was Clarence Mitchell Jr. who President Johnson referred to when he told the story of a man who knew that change not only could happen, but would happen.
I said, if you want to go with me, then let's send a message to the Congress and let's ask them for equality in our country, equality in housing. And I remember one strong, loud voice that said, yes, sir, we can do that, and we will do it, and it will go. And I had great respect for him. It was Clarence Mitchell. He's here before. He didn't have the highest title in the room, but he had torn down my door up there more when I was there.
All in all, Mitchell served 8 presidents. His greatest moment coming in 1980 when Jimmy Carter presented him with the nation's highest award, the Medal of Honor. Clarence Mitchell toppled the walls of discrimination. He cajoled and compromised, but most of all, he spoke with passion and integrity.
I think this is the reason why Clarence Mitchell made such a name for himself. This is the reason why he won such great respect, admiration, had so many friends. He was, to me, a very, very dear and close friend, one whom I admired greatly. I will long remember as probably one of the chief architects of our civil rights laws, a man who was tremendously responsible for being able to bring together the contending forces and to do some of the things which you might think were almost nigh impossible to get done.
Well, Clarence Mitchell would himself be the first to say that the success of the civil rights movement was the work of many hands, and it obviously was. But if Clarence Mitchell's pair of hands had not been working with skill, with care, with knowledge, I don't think it could have gone as well.
He was a behind-the-scenes giant. He worked in these halls knowing he was doing something permanent for history, for people. The lion of the lobbyist, the 101st Senator, Clarence Mitchell, Jr.
It was once said of Clarence Mitchell that he didn't speak too often of brotherly love. Rather, he lived it. He lived it, and he passed it on to his family. When we return, we'll introduce you to the Mitchell family, the legacy of the lion in the lobby. The Mitchell family, a loving father and mother and 4 growing boys. They were not rich in money, but there was an abundance of love and understanding. Ray Bennett introduces us to the family of Clarence Mitchell, Jr., and the legacy it carries on now that he is gone.
If Clarence Mitchell, Jr. was the lion in the lobby, then you might consider this the lion's den. Even though Clarence Mitchell, Jr. was one of the most respected men in the nation's capital, often called to the White House to advise presidents. In its own way, this row house on Druid Hill Avenue tells you something of the man who lived inside it. He could have moved to a much bigger, fancier house, but he chose not to. That was the thing about Clarence Mitchell, Jr. He wanted to be close to the people he served, and so he was. Clarence Mitchell, Jr. and Juanita Jackson were married on September 7th, 1938. They were right out of college, and from the beginning, they resolved that theirs would be a family committed to the black struggle for freedom and equality.
He was fiercely determined to do something about racial discrimination, which was terrible when we were coming up in Baltimore.
The Mitchells had 4 sons, and reason to be proud of each of them. Kiefer is a skilled surgeon. George is a successful businessman. Michael is a prominent attorney and city councilman. And Clarence III is a state senator. As children, they stayed home and did their chores while their father crusaded for equality. His days away from them often stretched into weeks, even months.
I used to explain to them that Daddy was in a home front battle, and he was going to make it better for them and all the children of the world.
We were a part of what was going on. That, I think, if gave us a clear understanding at an early age what was going on. So there was really no need of an explanation by either parent that, you know, well, we are doing this and doing that, and we just fell right into it.
I remember one incident in particular when we heard of his arrest in Florence, South Carolina, and we were in middle school, and I remember Clarence planning to organize a group of his friends to go down and free him from jail in Florence, South Carolina. So we kept abreast of all of his activities as he moved throughout the country.
We grew up with this desire, and it bred into our, woven into our lives, desire for freedom and not willing to stand back. My father was very proud and told us to stand up as men.
The struggle for equality was Clarence Mitchell's life's work, but his life was his family. And while he didn't bring home much money, he brought home a treasure chest of experiences.
He shared all of his experiences with his children. He shared his conversations with Harry Truman, shared his conversations with an Eisenhower, but also shared his conversations with humble people who we hadn't known, freedom fighters that he had met in the South as he traveled about the NAACP's business. So we sit here as four repositories of this great wealth of contact and experience and history that is not lost because he shared it with all of his sons.
He also shared his love for music with his family, and until this day, it's in his home. What you see here may be the true legacy of Clarence Mitchell Jr., his sons. For Clarence Mitchell Jr. had dreams, and they have made them their own. Through business, medicine, law, and politics, they continue his work to reach and help his people.
Clarence Mitchell Jr. died last March. Some of the nation's most renowned leaders came to Baltimore to pay their last respects. We'll take you to that memorial service when we come back. On March 18, 1984, Clarence Mitchell Jr. died of heart failure. The lion would roar no more. The memorial service itself was a testament to the greatness of the man. America came to Baltimore, to the Sharp Street Memorial Methodist Church, to honor a man whose life had, in turn, honored America. It was a great gathering. Civil rights people, political people, ordinary people. Some knew him, some only knew of him. Only Clarence Mitchell could bring these kinds of people together. He did it in his life, and on March 23rd, 1984, he did it one more time.
Got out of my car, and I thought if Clarence were standing beside me, he would have said, for me.
He said to me then, he said, I want you, he said, when my time comes, he said, don't you let them have me laying up there in some church and some kind of sad, he said, I'll come back and get you, boy. He said, if you let them do that.
It was not a day for sadness. It was a day of remembrance, for friends and family to share with one another their favorite stories, to talk fondly of the man who had brought them all together.
And I remember that I was walking in an ERA march down Pennsylvania Avenue, and I saw him, and I left the line and went and grabbed him and pulled him in. And we marched together down that avenue. And he said, he laughed, he said, you know, this will really help me with the women in my family.
While so many others saw injustice and turned their eyes from it, Clarence saw it and fought with all of his strength to replace it with justice. While some others saw wrong and they lamented the meanness of wrong, Clarence saw it and so many times replaced it with right. Others saw racism and deplored it. Clarence saw racism
and deployed all of his infinite intellectual capacity to destroy it.
I don't mourn his passing. I celebrate his being. He still lives through each and every one of us. If you don't believe he still lives, come to the Maryland Senate and hear him on the floor of the Senate. If you don't believe he still lives, come to the Baltimore City Council and see him on the floor of the City Council. If you don't believe he still lives, go to one of our hospitals or 1230 Druid Hill Avenue and see a doctor who is practicing medicine that my father could not afford to go to medical school to be able to practice. He lives. He's here. We have no reason to be sad.
Clarence Mitchell Jr. will be remembered for his determination to guarantee and protect the civil rights of all Americans. When work is completed on this majestic old courthouse, it will stand as a permanent monument to one of Baltimore's true heroes. He was truly a giant among men and a lion in pursuit of his cause. I'm Edie House. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
And he, to me, is one of the most warm, respectable individuals I've ever met.
We were in the struggle for freedom, in the fight for freedom, and everybody just enlisted in it.
You began to trust the man, whether Republican or Democrat.
I'm awfully disturbed that not enough people knew of his work until his death.
You feel a hand on your shoulder that would affectionately tug at you, telling you, I love you, son.
He had won me with the idea that I was his princess, and he was my prince.
I think he gave what he had to help bring about a better day for his people.